everyone. I'm Dr. Erika Sigurdson, and welcome to Making History. I'm going to do something a little bit different today, so I thought I'd take a bit of a break and talk to you instead about medieval beauty standards. So I've given this some thought, and I want to do this from the top down. You'll see why when we get to the end. So, starting from the top. So in the Middle Ages, it was generally the style for women to have quite a high forehead, like quite a high hairline. And you see women plucking and shaving that hairline to get this very, to my eye, very weird forehead line, right? Very far back. Sticking with the hair and the head, we'll talk about hair. So hair should be long and thick, right? And so you had throughout the Middle Ages, you had different styles of like a headdress or veil, but a lot of them, if not all of them, had ways to show hair, especially for younger unmarried women. One style from like the 12th century, I think, that you see a lot as like a medieval style was a veil, but then two braids kind of coming out of the veil down the sides. And so to achieve that look of thick, long hair, if you're someone like me whose hair doesn't naturally grow that thick, there were options. And we have accounts from like moralists complaining about women who are so vain that they buy or take hair from, I think, poor people and sometimes potentially corpses. Which sounds gross, but obviously women weren't, noble women weren't digging up corpses to cut their hair off. I mean, it's more of a, I know a guy kind of a thing, right? And the last thing to say about hair is that if you can at all manage it, it should be blonde, because blonde hair is closer to Christ. Not because people necessarily thought that Christ had blonde hair so much as it's like a color association thing where blonde hair looks like gold or like sunlight, both of which are kind of associated with divinity. There were recipes for lightening your hair. There were also recipes, though, for making your hair more black, which may have been to cover grays. Let's move on down to the face. I don't have as much to say about the face. The skin should be pale. That's pretty constant, but still rosy, right? Pale skin, some blush in there, lips kind of red. But the one thing I do want to point out is the importance of shining eyes, right? So the eyes in medieval thought were particularly important. The eyes were the windows to the soul, right? They were how you expressed yourself. And in medieval romance, if we can believe medieval romance, the eyes, the main thing you do with your eye is like very intense, I'm struggling not to say what I want to, not to call it what I want to call it, but like some very intense flirting through the eyes. So having fine, sparkling eyes was an important piece of the medieval beauty standard for women. So then we can move on down to body standards. And you might think that in a culture that didn't have quite as much access to body modifications as we do today, that there wouldn't be such a strict beauty standard, but you'd be wrong. The ideal woman's body in the Middle Ages had sort of small, sloped sort of shoulders, quite small breasts, to the point that actually there are a lot of remedies to be found in later medieval handbooks for like breast reduction techniques. They tended to involve like concoctions, like herbal concoctions you'd sort of like put on there to keep them small and firm, right? And there's a French romance, I think 13th century, that I don't think I can quite quote it exactly, but the heroine says something like, "My breasts are so nice, they're small like and firm like a walnut." So this is our standard. And then we go on to quite a slim waist, and here's where it gets particularly weird from a modern point of view, because the medieval body, and you can see it over and over and over again particularly in illustrations where there's more of a stylized female body than an actual realistic human body, is this quite substantial like lower belly, right? Like a pooch. That space between a woman's, your belly button. That's sort of that space between your belly button and like pubic bone, I guess. Where you can sometimes start to develop a little bit of a pouch. That was the sexiest thing you could do in the Middle Ages. So it's really cool. Like in the 12th century, we see a fashion for a particular kind of dress called a blio. And that's the dress, if you've ever seen that sort of like medieval style dress with the, the sleeves that they're tight to the elbow and then they go right down to the floor very dramatically. So that's a blio. But the other piece of that particular fashion is a tight waist and then kind of pleating or darts that create the illusion of a more pronounced little pooch, right? And you can also then add a belt, but not a tightly cinched belt, sort of these like low slung belts that again really draw the eye to that area. And I don't know if I'm going to show these because I don't know if I can, but like starting in the 15th century, you start to get these nudes, particularly illustrations of the biblical narrative of Bathsheba in the bath, right? So it's fine because it's in the Bible, but you don't see them until the very tail end of the Middle Ages anyway. And if you look at Bathsheba in the bath, you can, her naked body, man, she looks weird. Weirdly proportioned by modern standards, right? So this very apple-shaped middle. And we have to imagine that she's representing some kind of exaggerated but idealized standard of beauty because Bathsheba in the story is supposed to be this incredibly beautiful woman. The sight of her ruins David forever. Fun. So anyway, that more or less is, sorry, I feel kind of grim thinking about the ugliness of the Bathsheba and David story, but we'll kind of set that aside for another time. That's my story. That is your perfect medieval woman. So that's it for me for this week. Thank you guys all so much for listening. It's been a fun one. And until next week, be curious, be open, do good history, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.